Today's video lesson, we're going to continue talking about human influence on the ecosystems, and we're going to focus on ecological footprints. What is an ecological footprint? When we talk about ecological footprints, we're talking about a calculation that tells us how much land and water resources we are using to sustain a population of any size given our consumption patterns at that point in time. So really what we're talking about when we measure our ecological footprint is how much nature does it take to sustain our population given our lifestyle and given the waste that we're producing. Why is this kind of calculation useful? We can use this footprint calculation on an individual level to measure sustainability. If we're making some changes in our lives and wondering if it's really making an impact, we can use this kind of calculator to measure sustainability over a given time. We can also use it nationally, we can use it globally to take a look at our population as a whole and see if any measures that we are taking to protect our ecosystems are really having any kind of impact at all. Individuals can use this, governments can use this, and we can really use it to monitor our ecological conservation efforts. It just gives us a value that we can use as a comparison purpose over time to see if any changes that we're making are doing anything to improve our footprint status. What kinds of things are considered when we're calculating our ecological footprint? The calculators generally look in four areas. First one is our carbon use, and that's really reflecting fossil fuel use, energy usage, and they'll ask you kinds of questions like how far are you driving and what's the fuel economy on your car, and they're really trying to get an indication of your energy usage. Also your food use as a measure of what kind of agricultural resources are being utilized to sustain your lifestyle. Your housing use, what kind of housing complex are you living in? Is it a standalone home? Is it an apartment building? Shared housing? What is the housing use and what impact might that house have on ecological resources? Is it a green home or not? And also it's going to look at our spending patterns, our goods and services use. Are we people who only replace things when they need to be replaced, or are we a population who goes for the luxury goods and whatever the latest gadget is, we have to have it? It is interesting to compare ecological footprints of countries around the world. This gives you a list of some random countries, Canada included, as well as some European and Asian countries as well. And it measures our footprint as a measure of hectares per capita. Now that might be a unit you aren't familiar with. Per capita means per person, and a hectare, if you want to compare for size, how big is a hectare? It's about 100 meters by 100 meters. If that really doesn't help you out, a hectare is about 2.5 acres. And if that's still a little bit vague, if you can imagine 2 football fields, that's about a hectare in size. So these footprint calculations are hectares per capita or per person. So in Canada, they've calculated that it takes about 7.1 hectares per person of ecological resources to sustain our lifestyle. In the United States, it's 9.4. So the United States on this list has the highest ecological footprint of the countries listed. If you compare to European countries, Italy and Portugal, 4.4 for Portugal, 4.8 for Italy, 5.3 for the UK, 4.2 for Germany. So European countries have quite a smaller ecological footprint in comparison. In part, this has to do a little bit about urban sprawl. So in Canada and the US, we tend to rely less on public transportation. We don't really walk as far. European countries tend to be more reliant on public transportation, which means they use less energy resources that way. They also tend to walk more, especially in the cities, than we do. So that lowers their ecological footprint. They also tend to be less energy reliant. I know if you go to Europe, they aren't as reliant on things like dishwashers and dryers and sort of the convenience things that we use all the time. And that as well lowers their ecological footprint. If we look at places like India and China, which are heavily populated, India only has a 0.9 hectare per capita footprint, and China has a 2.1 hectare per capita, significantly lower than the other countries on the list. Even though these countries have such a large population base, still their ecological footprints are small, in part because they aren't quite as developed as we are. They don't have the same infrastructure. They don't have the same level of luxury spending. They tend to live a little more conservatively in terms of energy usage. They tend to have more people living together in a housing complex, so they make more use of housing space. And they just haven't gotten to that economic level where they're spending on luxury goods the way we are. So that keeps their ecological footprint a little bit lower. If we look at the world overall, taking into consideration everybody's lifestyle, we're at about a 2.7 hectare per capita ecological footprint, so 2.7 hectares per person. And again, the world average is significantly lower than what we're enjoying in the developed countries in Canada and the US. Now, that being said, if we look at the current state of the Earth, we say that we are running an ecological deficit. That means that our demand, so the ecological resources that are required to sustain our population in the whole biosphere, are currently exceeding the capacity of the Earth. So the resources we need are far greater than what the Earth can actually sustainably provide. So the Earth is not able to sustainably provide this level of resource usage over the long term. So if we wanted to sustain our current level of demand, we would actually need 1.5 Earths to do that. And since, of course, it's not possible to add on an extra half an Earth, we're left with a little bit of a dilemma. The way that we're living and using the Earth's resources, we are really exceeding what the Earth can provide, and we're exceeding by about half an Earth. Now, I asked you for homework to calculate your own ecological footprint, and I think most of us found that if everyone in the world lived like we do, we would need far more than 1 Earth to sustain us. And I know all of you got different values, and we'll talk about that in class. But do take the time to complete the ecological footprint calculator that's on the website. Given your results from that ecological footprint calculator, there are ways that you can look at your own ecological footprint and assess your own lifestyle and commit to change in order to reduce your own ecological footprint. So in looking at those 4 categories, how can we reduce our carbon footprint? Remember, that's our usage, our reliance on energy resources. You can do things like walk more often, ride your bike, carpool, use public transit. Now, I know in our area, being a little bit more of a rural area, public transit really isn't as easily accessible as it is in the bigger cities. But I'm sure there are instances where you could walk instead of drive, where you could ride your bike or carpool. Also, there's a suggestion to avoid short airplane trips. Airplanes are huge users of energy, of fuel. So if we can avoid short airplane trips, that would help out. If we could change our appliances to energy efficient ones, change our light bulbs to compact fluorescent bulbs, those are small impacts that could really make a difference to your ecological footprint. We could use our dryer less. We could choose to dry our clothes outside, particularly in the summertime, to cut back on our energy usage in the dryer. And we can make sure our homes are weatherproof so that we're not losing out on some of that energy by having leaky windows and doors. Also, with our electronics, we could try to unplug them when not in use to cut down on that source of energy usage as well. Reducing our food footprint, there are a lot of movements recently about eating local. We can really try, especially in our area, this is an easy thing to do in the summertime when we have plentiful fruit and vegetable stands. We can eat local produce, we can grow our own gardens. We can choose to make more organic choices in our fruits and vegetables. Those are less reliant on pesticide usage and herbicide usage and cuts down on damage to the ecosystems that way. We can also make a conscious effort to eat lower on the food chain more often. Remember, the farther up the food chain that we eat, we're requiring more of the Earth's resources to sustain those agricultural, like cattle and things like that are using a lot of ecological resources. So if we eat lower on the food chain, we can save some resources that way. We can also make a conscious effort to buy food that is less packaged. So avoid those inner aisles of the grocery store and stay around the perimeter. More packaging requires more resources again. Plastics and plastic manufacturing requires a lot of resources and increases our footprint. We can look at our housing and ways that we can improve the ecological friendliness of our housing choices. So where we can use green design features, we can recycle water, we can consider solar heating panels, we can use certified sustainable building products. For example, if you're replacing flooring, a choice of something like bamboo, which is a very rapidly grown crop. It's easy to replace, it grows back very quickly. That's considered a sustainable building product. We can make a choice if we're replacing appliances to only replace them with energy efficient ones, and we can do comparisons in the marketplace to see which are the most efficient. When we're cleaning, we can use non-toxic cleaning products to save our water. And then we can be conscious of running our dishwasher, washer, and dryer only for full loads. And you can also be conscious of running those appliances during off-peak times where electricity is cheaper. And again, most of us recycle. We can also consider composting and saving those waste products as well. So compost, again, is where you save the organic leftover, vegetable peels and banana peels and that sort of thing, and use them as fertilizer for gardens instead of throwing them in the garbage and having them end up in the landfill. So those are all options for reducing our housing footprint. Perhaps the toughest one is to reduce our goods and services footprint, because this means we have to really take a look at, are we buying things that we need, or are we buying things that we want? So the idea here is buy less, reduce what we buy. You've heard the saying, reduce, reuse, recycle. The reduce part is probably the hardest in our economy and in our lifestyle, because we see the latest product, we see our friends with the latest product, and we feel like it's something we just have to have. If we adopt a new mindset and we only replace items when they're necessary, not when the latest iPad, iPhone 7 comes out and you just have to have it, perhaps only replace when it's necessary. Buy recycled products where we can. I also try to buy products that have less packaging, because packaging is really wasteful and it's really hard on the ecological resources, so less packaging is better. Reuse where you can, recycle where you can, especially your electronics. Make sure that you take your electronics to recycling depots rather than throwing them in the garbage. So those are some suggestions that we have for reducing our own personal ecological footprints. This videocast went along with the handout that I gave you, and if you could make sure that that handout is filled out with the information on this presentation, that would be great. We will discuss your personal ecological footprints in class, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Have a great night.